Hi, I have some bad news. I can't find, or I can find, but the application I use for showing my screen while I record is not working. I'm not sure why. And I know there's like 1,000 other applications, but I don't have time to review them. We're going to just do this and bear with me. And I'll post the text of whatever we read together today, which is just going to be two poems and kind of a lot of discussion of the chapters you read last week. So you're supposed to read chapters 12, 13, 14, and 15. 12 was theme and tone. 13 was, what was it? I think language order and diction. And 14 was imagery. Oh, the language and diction was called figures of speech. 14 was imagery, and 15 was symbol. So we're going to look at those kind of grouped together. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on theme and tone because we spend a lot of time on that with regard to fiction. It's not so different in poetry. But I do want to make it clear that there's a distinction between mood and tone. So the mood of a piece is how you, the reader, feel reading it, not your personal mood, but what's happening in the story. What is the mood? Is the mood gloomy? Is it happy? Is it excited? Is it anticipatory? The tone is different than mood. Often people mistake them or mix them up, mistake them for each other or confuse them. Tone is the writer's attitude toward the content they're discussing. So mood and tone may impact each other. Rather, tone impacts mood, but they are not the same thing. So just be aware of that. So theme and tone, we know what theme is. It's like the big major kind of idea of the whole piece. Theme and tone and mood, we're not going to spend more time on than I just spent. We are, however, going to talk a little bit about figures of speech, language, word choice, and we are going to talk about imagery and symbolism, and we're going to look at two specific poems to do this together. Then I'm not feeling very well today. I don't know what's going on, but I've got a bit of a headache and I'm finding it difficult to think clearly. So I'm not going to make a poor video for you. So rather than spending time rambling on, we'll go over these two poems. I'll kind of root them as much as I can in what your book went over with regard to these elements of poetry. But then I'm going to link two videos from last semester when we first went online. They're both very long. You do not have to watch them, but they are a deeper dive into the poems I'm going to assign for you to read if you do watch them. So if you're struggling with some of the poems I assign, spend some time watching the videos or just listening to it. Have it in the background while you're making food or something, because listening to me discuss the poems may help you as you're reading them and looking for these elements of poetry within them. Next week, we're going to get the assignment for the poetry unit essay. It will be a research essay, and I'm going to go over that in great detail next week. But as you read poems this week, you're going to read a lot of poems. They're mostly short. But as you read these poems this week, I want you to be thinking about what you think, what poem resonates with you the most, what element of poetry resonates with you, and what you think you might want to write about. Okay? So let's talk about these two poems. They're two of my favorite poems in the world. One is called The Colonel by Caroline Forche, and then one is Untitled by Charles Simic. It's actually the first, I think it's considered the first stanza in his kind of like wandering book-long poem called The World Doesn't End. I think of them as all separate and discrete poems, but however you want to think about it, it's a gorgeous poem. And after I read each piece, I'll kind of go through and pull apart where I see figurative language, where I see imagery and symbolism. And of course, all these things work together. A metaphor is able to bring out the symbolism in a piece. We use similes to look at the theme, right? All of these things are kind of like a woven piece of fabric. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm feeling so bad. Okay. The Colonel by Caroline Forche. What you have heard is true. I was in his house. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. There were daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside him. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. On the television was a cop show. It was in English. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's legs or cut his hands to lace. On the windows, there were gratings like those in liquor stores. We had dinner. Rack of lamb, good wine. A gold bell was on the table for calling the maid. The maid brought green mangoes, salt, a type of bread. I was asked how I enjoyed the country. There was a brief commercial in Spanish. His wife took everything away. There was some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. The parrot said hello on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up and pushed himself from the table. My friend said to me with his eyes, "Say nothing." The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. He spilled many human ears on the table. They were like dried peach halves. There is no other way to say this. He took one of them in his hands, shook it in our face, dropped it into the water glass. It came alive there. "I am tired of fooling around," he said. "As for the rights of anyone, tell your people they can go fuck themselves." He swept the ears to the floor with his arm and held the last of the wine in the air. "Something for your poetry, no?" he said. Some of the ears on the floor caught the scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground. Okay, so there's a lot we can talk about here. As far as symbolism, I think I want to focus mostly on symbolism and imagery. So this poem's great when it comes to imagery because we've got two kind of levels of imagery. We've got very specific physical details of the setting. The setting is expertly set for us by Carolyn Forche. We can picture everything. Initially, it feels pretty innocuous, fine, it's just a dinner party. But then we get this other layer of imagery, which is the more metaphorical part of imagery, which is where kind of a symbolism can start to come in, and then metaphors, right, to go back to our language, diction, and our figurative language, right? When I say diction, I mean word choice. So we've got what you've heard is true, so we know we're about to hear a real story, a true story. I was in his house. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. There were daily papers, pet dog, a pistol on the cushion beside him. So we have normal image, normal family image, right? And then we have a pistol on the cushion beside him, strange. Then we have the moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. I love this line almost more than, I'm not going to say any line in poetry, but I think it's so profoundly and almost intoxicatingly severe in its way of elegantly but sharply injecting terror into the poem. Obviously, the poem is full of terror by the time we get to the end of it. This man is inhumane and possibly inhuman. He seems like an abusive, controlling colonel, which is what he is. He's executing people. He's cutting their ears off. He's mutilating bodies, right? But we don't have any of that yet. The only hint at that is that there's a pistol on the couch beside him, but many people have many reasons to have pistols, right? That doesn't have to be sadistic. That doesn't have to be oppressive. But then we get this line about the moon swinging bare on a black cord over the house. What else swings bare on a cord? I always think of the naked light bulb swinging on a cord that you kind of see in scenes in movies where there's an interrogation or somebody's being abused or tortured in a basement. Just the fact that the moon, this holy, feminine, gorgeous nightlight, isn't free and moving on its own accord, but is stuck to a cord in the sky and swinging bare, like swinging nakedly, right? It creates this sort of ominous mood for the reader. So that was imagery, also symbolism, because the moon usually symbolizes things like femininity, reproduction, power, calmness, peace, right? But in this poem, the moon's attachment to this black cord brings in a feeling of fear and kind of the symbolism of all that is beautiful being fixed to something, being trapped by something, right? So we can keep going and take the poem apart piece by piece. I don't want to do that, but I want to look at the very end. He swept the ears to the floor with his arm and held the last of the wine in the air. Something for your poetry, note, he said. Some of the ears on the floor caught the scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground. So this is really interesting because it's kind of personification, but not exactly, because the ears belonged to a person, right? So personification is when we take something inanimate, having never lived, a thing that does not live, like a pillow or a bench or, my phone, and we give it human qualities. So if I said my phone is sad because the case is falling apart, there's nail polish on the back, and the whole thing is cracked, right? That would be personification. My phone does not feel sadness. I feel sadness that my phone is destroyed. My phone doesn't have the capacity to feel sadness. But if I attribute my human emotions and qualities to the phone, that's personification. So we almost have that happening with the ears, but it's not quite that, because the ears have belonged to humans, right? But we have them sort of being autonomous and animated, reanimated with this human life. And there's a lot to unpack here, because the ears themselves become a kind of metaphor. He uses them first to scare the dinner guests, right? Or right before the colonel brings out the ears. I believe it's right before. Her friend says, "Say nothing," with his eyes. Yes, my friend said to me with his eyes, "Say nothing." The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. Then he throws the ears out. So he's trying to threaten them. He's trying to make his point clear that he does not care about human rights. He cares about governing and ruling, right? And governing and ruling the way he and the government he's aligned with wants to. So the ears become this kind of, not bargaining chip, but an evidence of his power. So they carry this symbol, and this, the imagery of the ears is horrifying, but the horror of the imagery of the ears carries the symbol of his power and also his horror, his terror, not his actual fear, but the fear he instills in other people, because he will cut people's ears off, right? But then at the end, the ears become human again, and they become separate from him. And so some of the ears caught the scrap of his voice, so they've landed up like this. And then some of the ears were pressed to the ground. This ending line does this incredible thing where it gives us, I don't want to say hope, it's not hope, but it is power. So I don't know if you've heard the expression, your ear pressed to the ground, or your ear to the ground, having an ear to the ground. It means that you're aware of what's happening and what's coming. It means that you are listening to the vibrations on the ground from a coming thing, right? So it speaks to an awareness, it speaks to an incisiveness, it speaks to intellectual and physical kind of agility to like be ready for something. And so even in the midst of this terrible scene, we have Carolyn Forche give us this image, this metaphor really, for the people he's oppressing, being aware of it, and possibly having a chance of preparing or getting away. That's how I read it anyway. So be aware when I'm doing this. I haven't sat down with Carolyn Forche and interviewed her to ask her exactly what she meant by these things. This is my interpretation of this poem, but my verbalization of that to you is an opportunity for you to internalize how I'm modeling it and to start to do that yourself. So there could be many other interpretations for this. But either way, there's also, going back a few lines, there's a simile somewhere. I think that, they were like dried peach halves. Ears like dried peach halves. It's like not super much strong. I don't even know what I just said. See, this is how unwell I feel. That's not exactly a simile. Like a simile is two unlike things to have a sort of metaphorical or figurative significance. She's just saying the ears look like dried peach halves, but it follows the same like language pattern of a simile, if that makes any sense. Okay, so that's that poem. I'm going to go down to Untitled by Charles Simic. My mother was a braid of black smoke. She bore me swaddled over the burning cities. The sky was a vast and windy place for a child to play. We met many others who were just like us. They were trying to put on their overcoats with arms made of smoke. The high heavens were full of little shrunken deaf ears instead of stars. So, this poem, the mood of this poem is there's a sense of wonder and there's also a sense of fear, I think. There's a sense of running and leaving. And the tone of this poem is full of wonder and also is sort of reminiscing of a difficult and harrowing time. And so if we look at the language, my mother was a braid of black smoke. We've got a metaphor there. Because a metaphor is when you are comparing without, like, or as two things that do not share any qualities to reveal some bigger truth, right? So the fact that his mother is a braid of black smoke, let's tear that apart or break that down. Black smoke is not the same as white smoke. If you have a bonfire with, well-seasoned wood, the wood releases white smoke, right? If you have a city on fire due to war or a burning building that should not be burning, you have black smoke. So black smoke is often a sign of something burning that should not be burning, right? And then a braid of black smoke. I love this image because a braid of smoke, to braid something together relies on those things, at least a braid with 3 strands, relies on those 3 separate strands being separate and then braided together. But here you have smoke. We know smoke is it's not discrete. It's kind of more like water, right? So the idea that it's a braid of black smoke, we know the smoke is toxic and shouldn't be happening. We know that it's braided together, but we know that smoke doesn't stay in one way. And then also this is his mother, right? So the person who's supposed to care for him is this insubstantial, immaterial, toxic smoke. You could infer that that means that she's toxic. I don't think that's what this poem means. I think that this poem is speaking to her desire to protect her children and her inability to do so. So then the next line, she bore me swaddled over the burning cities. So that could be literal, except for the over, the fact that it's over, right? And the next line leads us to believe they're flying through the sky. The sky was a vast and windy place for a child to play. So you really get this feeling, this sense of dread in the poem and people trying to exit that dread, which in fact I believe is what the poem is about. But I'm going to not tell you more about that because one of the possibilities for your essay, your research essay, is to research the historical context of the poem and of the author and do some work around what the poem might mean and how the elements of poetry, like figurative language, like metaphors, like similes, like symbolism, and like, why do I keep forgetting? Oh, imagery, are used to elucidate that historical meaning and the meaning of the poem itself. So I hope that was a little intro to how to apply all the work you did last week in reading those 4 chapters to poetic works themselves. Let me just go over, actually, let me stop this and then I'll do your assignment for this week in a separate video.